Hey guys, so we're moving on to the next unit, and that's Unit 4. And Unit 4 starts out with graphing linear inequalities, and it's pretty much a review from Algebra 1. So if you remember this from Algebra 1, hopefully you'll have an easier time with this. But as part of the review, there's two new parts to think about when graphing inequalities as opposed to equations. So when you were graphing equations, they had to be in that y equals mx plus b for you to graph, and you just had to graph the line. So now what you have to do is you got to do two more things. You have to figure out what type of line it is based on the inequality. So if you see the inequality symbol greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, then you are going to plot a solid line. And if you see the inequality symbol greater than or less than without the line underneath, then you're going to create a dashed line. Okay? The second thing that you'll need to know is where to shade. So if you see the inequality symbols greater than or equal to or greater than, then that is telling you to either shade above or to the right. Okay? And then if you see the inequality symbols less than or equal to, then that is telling you to shade below or to the left of your line. Okay? So in the first example, in your practice in ALEX, they're just asking you to graph inequalities that are horizontal and vertical lines first, okay? So in this example, it says think HOI and VUX. So remember, HOI stands for horizontal line and y equals. So basically a horizontal line is always going to be y equals some number. That's going to be a horizontal line. So horizontal. And then VUX stands for a vertical line is x equals a number. So if you see x equals, we know we're going to make a vertical line. And if you see y equals, we're going to make a horizontal. So look at the first one. The first one we have y less than 3. So I know right off the back that this is going to be a horizontal line because of HOI, because it's a y. What I'm going to do in order to plot this is I'm going to plot a point at y equals 3, which is right there. And then I'm going to make a line that is horizontal at that point. However, I have to pay attention to my inequality symbol. That less than symbol tells me, since it's just a less than symbol, that tells me that I have to make a dashed line, and it tells me that I have to shade below or to the left of that dashed line. So I am going to make a dashed horizontal line across this point. Okay, and then I'm going to shade everything that is below. Okay, and that tells me that all of the numbers that are less than y equal to 3 work for this inequality. Okay, in the next one, we have x equals. So we know right off the back that this one is going to be a vertical line. Okay, so I'm just going to plot a point at x equals 3. And then I know I'm going to make a vertical line, but I have to look at my inequality symbol first to see what type of line I need to make. So my inequality symbol is greater than or equal to. So that tells me that I'm going to make a solid line at that point. And it tells me that I'm going to shade to the right, or we would consider that above. In this case, watch what happens. I'm going to make a vertical line at 3, and I'm going to make it solid. Okay, because that's what the inequality tells us. And technically, we're asked to shade above, but instead of shading above, since this is a solid line, we know that we can shade to the right here. And that tells me all of the numbers that are greater than or equal to 3 work for this inequality. Okay. In the next one, we're moving on to graphing inequalities in the form y equals mx plus b. Okay, so remember, when you're graphing inequalities like this, you have to follow your steps very carefully here. The first thing you're going to do to make this slanted line is you're going to plot the y-intercept, which is the plus or minus part at the end of your equation. So plot the b on the y-axis. So in this first one, we have -3, so I'm going to plot a point right at -3 on my y-axis, okay? Then your next step is to use your slope. Knowing it means rise over run, to plot another point. So slope, rise over run, to plot another point. So from my -3, I'm going to go, since it's +1, I'm going to go up 1 and over 2 because it's 1/2. And then from there, I need to make my line. But before I decide what line to make, I have to look at my inequality symbol. My inequality symbol for this one is a greater than sign. So that tells me I'm going to make a dashed line, and I'm going to shade above that line. Okay? So right now I'm going to make a dashed line at these 2 points that goes through these 2 points. So it's a dashed slanted line. And then I'm going to shade above that line. So if I think of this as a slanted line with if you actually use your hand and lined it up, think about where you would shade that would be above your hand. And above your hand would be up here. Okay, because I know that a lot of people run into an issue where they think of what is above that line. So line up your hand to the line and think about what is above your hand. Okay, so let's look at the next example. In the next example, we have our b here is 4. So remember, plot the b on the y-axis. So I'm going to plot a 4 on the y-axis. And in this one, the slope, or the number that's out front of the x, is actually -1 here. So our slope is -1 over 1, which tells you rise over run. I'm going to go down 1 and right 1 to plot another point. Then before I start drawing my line, I need to figure out what type of line I'm going to draw. So I have the less than or equal to. The less than or equal to tells me I'm going to make a solid line because of that line underneath, or that equal to sign. And it tells me that I'm going to shade below. Okay? So I'm going to make a solid line this time that goes through those 2 points. And then my shading, again, if you put your hand up to this line, tell me what is below your hand. And below your hand, you will find that shading below this line would be down here. Okay, so that's where the shading would go for this one. So you have graphing a horizontal line, and then you have graphing a slanted line in the form y equals mx plus b. And then for the last one, we have graphing a line in standard form, which means you do have to do a couple things before you start to graph. You have to get it into y equals mx plus b first. So reminders, in order to do that, you got to isolate y, okay, so that you can get it into y equals mx plus b. And then if you divide by a negative, you have to make sure you flip the inequality. That's the most important piece, and a lot of people forget that. Remember, if you ever divide by a negative number, you flip the inequality symbol, okay? So let's solve for y in the first one. In the first example, we have -x plus 2y is greater than 4, or is greater than -4. So we're going to solve for y. So in order to do that, first we're going to move the x onto the other side. When we add x onto the other side, we have 2y is greater than -4 plus x. Okay? Then, in order to get y by itself, I still got to get rid of that 2, so I'm going to divide everything by 2. When I do that, I'm left with y, inequality stays the same because I didn't divide by a negative, greater than -2 plus, and I'm going to call this 1/2 x, because when there is nothing out front of the x, there is a 1 out front there. Now it's in y equals mx plus b, so I can graph. Be careful here. Our b, or our starting point that we're going to plot on the y-axis, is actually the -2. It's switched order, but it's still in y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to plot a point at -2 on my y-axis. And then my slope here is 1/2. So remember, that tells me where to move, rise over run. So I'm going to go up 1, right 2, and I'm going to plot my other point. And then our inequality symbol is the greater than. So that tells me that I'm going to make a dashed line because it doesn't have an equal to underneath. And I'm going to shade above that line. Okay, so let's make a dashed line that goes through these 2 points. And then if we put our hand up and tell me what is above your hand, that would be this area right here. You shade above your hand. Okay? And let's look at our last example and see if we'll have to do any flipping of the inequalities where we divide by a negative. So if we look at our last example, we have 3x minus 4y is less than or equal to negative 8, and we have to get y by itself. So let's do that first. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the 3x by subtracting it, okay? And then I'm left with negative 4y is less than or equal to negative 8 minus 3x, okay? Then in order to get the y by itself, I'm going to have to divide everything by a negative 4, all three pieces, okay? Watch what happens. When I divide it, since I divided by a negative, I'm now left with y, and my inequality symbol is going to flip direction because I divided by a negative 4, okay? Whenever you divide by a negative, you have to make sure you flip the inequality symbol. So we have y greater than or equal to, negative 8 divided by negative 4 is 2, and then negative 3 divided by negative 4 can't be done. So I'm going to leave it as a fraction because it's helpful to me for my slope, except a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so I'm going to change this to a plus 3/4 x. Now it's in y equals mx plus b. Be careful here when we find our starting point. Remember, it's the plus something. So the b here is 2. So I'm going to start by plotting a point at 2 on my y-axis. And then the slope here is 3/4. So that tells me what direction to go. So I'm going to go up 3, 1, 2, 3, and over 4. And I'm going to plot my second point. Then looking at my inequality symbol, that will tell me what line to make and where to shade. So since it's greater than or equal to, I know I'm going to make a solid line. And since it's the greater than, I'm going to shade above. Okay, so this one's going to be shading above as well. So I'm going to make a solid line that goes through these 2 points. And if I put my hand up to it and figure out what would be above my hand would be here. Okay, so you have to pay attention to how you are solving these inequalities, and then you got to pay attention to the extra steps of graphing, which is what type of line is it and where do you shade. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Good luck.